There are two lessons in chapter 13. The first lesson is 1 to 20, and the second lesson is 21 to the end. Okay? The first lesson is really about David's parenting style, or shall I say lack of parenting style. Permissive parenting, otherwise known as really crappy parenting. Okay? Really bad parenting. This is a permissive parent. Look, children need more than a home with a roof and a comfortable bed. They need guidance, they need shaping by their parents, they need a stable and consistent moral system. The problem that we're living in right now is that it's not that the country is going through a moral slide, it's that the homes already have. And the fact of the matter is the moral system of most people's homes is I do whatever I want. So left to themselves and left to their peers, kids are going to end up with trouble and emerge in destruction. That's what they're going to do. So I want to see if you can take a look at how the passage in chapter 13 focuses on the inside of Dave's home. This is what happens when, part of this is the things that happen in regard to how God plays out what he did. You know that, go back to chapter 12, go to chapter 12, verse 15, and you notice that the child that was born dies, right? And later on in verse 24, David comforted his wife, Bathsheba, went in, lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and he named him Solomon. So the child of the union outside of wedlock died, but a child was given to Bathsheba in replacement by God, and that's Solomon. And you end up with, in chapter 12, verses 24 and 25, you end up with some very, very interesting turns in his life. Let's go on past the sinful David now. Go to 12:24 for a minute. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, went in, lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and he named her Solomon. Solomon, Shlomo, comes from the word shalom, to be when all things are as they ought to be. Some people would say peace, but it means when all things are as they ought to be. And the Lord loved him. The Lord loved who? Who did the Lord love in verse 24? Solomon. So the Lord loved the child. So in other words, the first child died, but the second child was not only living, but also beloved of the Lord. And it says, now the Lord loved him and sent word through Nathan the prophet. What's Nathan's name? Gift, the prophet. And he named him Yedidiah. Yedidiah is beloved of God, beloved of Yahweh, for the Lord's sake. In other words, Solomon had another name. His nickname was beloved of God. And it became clear that although David had a broken heart and a contrite heart and bad things happened, a child died, David was able to resolve it in his life, and that didn't mark his life. Why did it not mark his life? Because he asked God to forgive him. And God then blessed him. And in 24 and 25, there's a blessing of another child. But that's not all. It's a mixed review, because look at the end. Joab fought against Rabbah, verse 26, sons of Ammon, and captured the royal city. Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah and have captured the city of waters. Now therefore gather the rest of the people together and camp against the city to capture it, or I will capture the city myself and it will be named after me. He says, listen, Dave, I'm about to take this city. If I take it, it's going to be named after me. If you get here with some generals, you can take credit for it. And Joab is thinking of his king, trying to redeem his king from what has already just happened. So David gathered all the people, went to Rabbah, fought against it, captured it. Then he took the crown of their king from his head, and its weight was a talent of gold. In it was a precious stone. It was placed on David's head, and he brought out the spoils of the city of great amounts. That's a 75-pound crown of gold. Okay? Which means, I don't know much about that king except for that he had a neck like an NFL linebacker. Okay? And then it says he brought out the spoil. And then verse 31, he also brought out the people who were in it and set them under saws, sharp iron instruments, iron axes, and made them pass through the brick kiln. And thus he did to all the cities of the sons of Ammon. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. In other words, he had them tortured. He had them killed by their own cruel practices. I don't know why. I can't tell you whether or not this was an acceptable practice. I can only tell you what it appears to most scholars is this. The way the Ammonites terrorized their own people and the way they maintained control was by cutting off limbs, by burning people alive, by casting people's children into fires in front of them, ripping out eyes, pulling out tongues, all kinds of torture devices. Apparently what David did was took the men that were involved in that practice and had all of them go through it. I'm not saying that I like this or accept it. I'm saying it is what it is. The writer's not trying to give you a commentary. He's just trying to say what he did. This is what he did. So Dave, fresh back from the, axing and torturing and murdering and mayhem, gets back to Jerusalem. Now, we pick up the parenting story. And it's almost like we went from this brutality, and now we go, boy, you think that was brutal? Let me tell you about his home, okay? This is the backstabbing home of Dave. And it starts off in verses 1 through 20 with this permissive parenting. Now, it was after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful daughter whose name was Palm Tree, Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so frustrated because of his sister Tamar, and that he made himself ill, for she was a virgin, and it seemed hard to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He said, "Oh, son of the king, why are you so depressed morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I am in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom." Now, here's what you need to know. These are all half-brothers and sisters. In other words, David is their father, but they all have different mothers. And the other part of this is that we can see right away that Amnon defined love by the radio. In most cases, almost every song you grew up with talking about love was really about sex. Let Us Love Tonight was not about love. So, Jonadab then said to him, "Lie down on your bed, pretend to be ill. Then your father comes to you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me some food to eat. So let her prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat from her hand.'" Then David sent to the house for Tamar, saying, "Go now to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." Tamar went down to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down, and she took bread, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. She took the pan, dished them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Have everyone go out from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat from your hand." So Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them into the bedroom to her brother Amnon. When she brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, my sister." Which the interesting thing is the last part. My sister. But she answered him and said, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. As for me, where could I get rid of my reproach? And as for you, you will be like one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." However, he would not listen to her, since he was stronger than she. He violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with a great hatred, for the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and go away." And she said to him, "No, because this wrong in me sending me away is greater than the other that you have done to me." Yet he would not listen to her. Then he called his young man who attended him and said, "Now throw this woman out of my presence," and locked the door behind her. Now she had on a long-sleeved garment, for in this manner the virgin daughters of the king dressed themselves in robes. Then his attendant took her out and locked the door behind her. Tamar put ashes on her head, tore her long-sleeved garment which was on her, and she put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Then Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? But now keep silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart." So Tamar remained and was desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Now when King David heard all these matters, he was very angry. Finish the sentence. And he did nothing. He did nothing. I want to go back and I want to look at this. There's some symptoms of this home that I think are necessary to take a look at. As you raise children, as God blesses you to raise children, I want you to see something. First of all, this is a complicated home. Why is it a complicated home? Because it's a blended home, and blended homes are very complicated. David's children were the result of several different wives, and there were complicating factors. The closest thing we have around here to a blended family would be like what I grew up in, or where people have former spouses and then they marry and then the kids are all together under one roof, but they're not all from the same parents, okay? If you're one of those kids that grew up with a different schedule for the holidays and different parents you went to, then you understand this home. It's a complicated home. The second thing I can see in verse 1, beyond the fact that it's complicated, is that dad is pretty busy. Do you notice the phrase, "now after this"? The phrase in the beginning, "now after this"? You know, after this running around like, conquering the world and getting 75-pound crowns put on your head and being like, king and destroying the nation next to you. And can we all just agree Dave's a busy guy? Okay? That he's a public guy, that he's got a lot going on. His own accomplishments are pretty big. How about this? The other problem is it's complicated and he's busy, but there's also a failure to proactively set boundaries in the home. In a permissive home, children will pretend to be sick so they don't have to go to school, and everybody will be too busy to figure it out. They'll put on a big show or throw a temper tantrum so that they don't have to clean up their toys, and they'll say, "I'm thirsty," so they don't have to go to bed. Why? Because they know it works. Guys, I know you're not there yet, but very, very quickly, you're going to forget all the stunts you pulled as kids, and your kids are going to try them again on you. Know this. Children are deceptive. They come into the world looking all loving and kind and cute and cuddly, and they are absolutely going to try to drive a wedge between you and your spouse. They are going to play one against the other. Some kids are they come out of the box manipulative. Remember, we train them. We train them. They know if they scream, they get something stuck in their mouth. We train them. Now, the problem is that Edward VIII, who was the Duke of Windsor, once observed about American families, the thing that impresses me most about America is the way the parents obey their children. I think that's an interesting statement. Okay, look at verse 2. I want you to see that one of the big problems is that there are opportunities to manipulate the parents that are part of the home. Amnon is frustrated. They're together. Now, don't, by the way, see them all as living in one house. Tamar lives in a different chamber of a different house than Amnon lives. Each of them live in the chambers according to their mothers. Okay? That's why bringing one from one to the other is not just like, it's not one big happy palace. These are separate chambered rooms. But what I want you to see is that that Amnon is able, in a very real way, to find a way to manipulate David's stamp of approval on his plan. David doesn't know that that's what Amnon's doing, right? I mean, you read the story. He doesn't know that, but he's pretty darn naive. Now, you're talking about a guy who had somebody's husband killed and slept with his wife. You'd think he'd be like a little bit more radar conscious of Amnon might have a little more of my blood than he should, or maybe this isn't a good situation. But no, he's sick and he needs his sister, and he's chosen that specific sister to come and make that specific meal in his specific bedroom. One of the things that happens is that Kids count on figuring out who's naive among their parents. I was a school principal. Can I just tell you? The number of times I heard parents look at me and go, my son would never do that, or my daughter would never do that, when I had it on tape. I could show them the video camera tape from the corner of the classroom where their child got up and smacked a teacher. And they would explain to me how it was the teacher's fault for sitting at the desk never moving. Now, Amnon here, look at Amnon's life. Who's his best friend? Who's that? What's that? What's his name? Yonadav. Okay, Yonadav is his friend. Okay, and Yonadav's advice is what? Lie to your dad. Yeah, lie to your parents. And this is a great story for a youth group. This is a great story. Do you know what she said before he raped her? What did she tell him?
This isn't right.
Yeah, but something else too.
Just ask Dad.
You could ask Dad and we could legally work this out, because they could. There was a way in which they could have done that. She was even saying, look, there's another way to go with this. And he would hear nothing of that. I think she did everything she could to reasonably, by the way, I don't think she wanted to, but I just think it was a question of, you're stuck in this situation, you're trying to find a way to get to the door, and you just keep them talking, do whatever you got to do. But I think that there was a real, can you see that she walked into this with nothing but obedience to her father? Okay? And a bunch of bread stuff and a cake pan. And she came out of this a destroyed woman. I do know that there was an opportunity to manipulate parents. I want you to note the illness in verse 2 and verse 6. There's an opportunity to manipulate. Be on your guard when you're the parent. Whatever they're telling you is a version of the truth that makes them look good and the other person look worse. Okay? How about this one? In verses 3 and 5, did you notice that Dave didn't monitor Amnon's friends very well? Just because they're relatives does not mean they're good influences. Okay. They can be cousins and be the worst thing possible. Does anybody have a really, really bad cousin? You don't have to name them or anything. But yeah, anybody have yeah. Okay, so I can only tell you that inside the family. The other thing is that in verse 4 and in verse 15, I see poor teaching on definitions. I think that Amnon needed some lessons in grammar. Like, you're not in L-O-V-E, you're in L-U-S-T. I think he didn't have good definitions. Shouldn't parents be involved in weighing into what the definitions are? Love, hate, I think some of that. Anybody think Dave's naive here? For a guy whose big mark in life was a sex crime, you think he'd be a little bit more pointed on these things. He seems to be dull as a doorknob on this. I think the other thing is that they offered too much unmonitored authority for their behavior. I'm picking up verse 9. Have everyone leave. Well, listen, Prince, you got a little bit too much authority for as off your nut as you are. Okay, what was the outcome of this poor parenting? Well, first of all, poor use of power. Permissive parents want to create a loving place. And the very opposite is often what happens. Why? Because the reality is that it's the nature of people to want power, whether they're young or old, and bad use of power creates fear. Children who don't respect their parents often fear one another. If you took out this story with a young woman who came to you and her life was shattered by these kinds of events, how does Tamar help you? Is there anything here redemptive? Can you do anything with this story? I know, we're in some weird stories today. I agree with you. It's a little bit weird. What do you do with this story? What did Tamar do wrong here? I'm not talking about maybe to get into the situation. I'm talking about after the situation. What did she do wrong? The very first thing that she does is she confides in someone else. Now, granted, Absalom leaned in and asked her a direct question, and I don't think she should have lied to him, but between them, they didn't come up with, you know what, we should maybe take this to somebody who can actually deal with the justice issue. David hears about it, but I don't think David would respond. This is the same David who got enraged over a story about sheep. What do you think would have happened if she'd have went marching into the throne room and said, Dad, I got to tell you what just happened? Anybody think that Amnon would have lived through the night? Because I think they'd have strung him up by body parts. I really do. My issue is the very first thing she does is she's broken inside. She sees this as something that has broken her. That's not true. This is not about her. This is about his evil, not hers. Remember that the biblical rule is if you're not in charge of it, if you can't take control of it, it is under the penalty of the person who was in control of it. Now, did she do wrong by showing up there? No, she obeyed her father. Should she have left when all the people left? I think she probably thought over that decision 100 times in her life after that. Like, if I only would have walked out when the servants did. But you know what? Honestly, the people who get taken advantage of most readily are the people who are most compassionate. I think the devil goes after people all the time based on their niceness and naivete. In Tamar's world, what she did wrong really is at the bottom of the story. Go down to verse 18. I think, by the way, she was very shocked at his response in verse 15, and I think she didn't know what to do with it. I think she got shoved out a door in verse 18. And one of the ways you're going to know that what the person wanted was the body and not you is the response right after, and that's what she went through. And verse 18 says, she had a long-sleeved garment, for on this matter the virgin daughters of the king dressed themselves in robes. What did she do to that garment in verse 19? Why?
It's a symbol of grief and that she wants to.
Yeah, she was not going to fake virginity, and she was not going to be the person who walked around trying to be something she wasn't, and she was brokenhearted. But you see what the real problem with that is? She's thinking this is about her, not about him. She's not the one who has the problem. He is. And ultimately, if you're using this in counseling, my warning to you is make sure that somebody knows that when you're in a power position, you're the one who's culpable. And when you're not in a power position, I don't want you to take one day walking around beating yourself over something that wasn't your fault. Any more than if somebody killed themselves and they were a friend of yours. It's not your fault. You didn't do it. The fact that you were there has nothing to do with it. By the way, the fact of whatever you felt during the event has nothing to do with it. That's not the issue. The issue is, did you plan this? Did you do this? Was this rebellion? Or were you caught in something? And I think very clearly she was caught in it. Does that make sense? I believe, honestly, that at the heart of this whole thing is David. I think this is a story of David. It's not just a story of Amnon, it's a story of David. Children don't just grow, we shape them. And David got busy doing many things, but what he did not do was deal with his children. And you know, the whole problem is permissive parents fail to lead, and because they fail to lead, their kids are the boss. So how do you change that? Well, let me offer a couple of guidelines. First of all, let me offer the love factor here. My home is a place where love is readily expressed. That's one of the things you can do in your home. You can start to openly, lovingly define love in front of your children. When I hug and kiss on my wife, my kids go, "Ooh, old people love." But they do it all the time. But they do it but they fuss about it. But you know what? Showing them what a relationship is the best thing I can do for them. It's really the most helpful thing I can do. Because you know what? You're not going to remember all the brilliant stuff your parents say, but you will remember the stuff they did. The second thing is that our home has to be a place of emotional and physical safety. I think it's absolutely required that you create emotional and physical safety for your children. If you don't do that, by the way, screaming in my home, I've said this over and over, screaming should be reserved for situations where a child is immediately unsafe. I have no problem with somebody screaming, car! But not screaming, will you pick that up? That's not a screaming situation. That's you're being lazy. There's a nice, normal, decent way. I mean, seriously, I'm an employer. I don't walk in and go, Matthew, pick that up. I mean, adults don't act like that. You can talk to people. One of the things, how many of you have done this? Come on, tell me the truth. You know your mom's not aggravated until the third time she says it. So you just wait it out. I mean, what's the point in getting up? You know, you're just going to sit there and wait till she gets to the third time. And now, how many of you know the tenor of her voice? Okay, that's a DEFCON 3. We got to get up now. How do I measure bad discipline? What's the difference between punishment and discipline? What's that? Motives is part of it. That's good. Good. What else? Okay, so we have the law of the balances. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? Let the punishment fit the crime. Punishment is about me as the parent. Discipline is about them as the child. When you punish a child, it's because you're aggravated. It's about you being aggravated. When you discipline them, it's about them getting better. In general, in Scripture, God doesn't punish, he disciplines. When God gets very upset with someone, he generally then sends them a sign of his love or something. You know, it's very different than with us. One of the things I think that happens, let me just give you a couple of words that I use, and I use these specifically with parenting. You can use them as you want, but I think they fit in this passage. Self-centered discipline, there's a couple things it looks like. Number one is the inconsistent discipline. The biggest gift you can give your child is consistency. I promise you this is true of babies. From the time they are born, if you just keep their bottom dry and clean and keep their stomach full, they're 80% better. Kids need a pattern. They just want the pattern. So every 2 hours you're checking the pants, and every 3 hours there's a bottle going in. And if you just do that, and if you don't create a schedule for them, but allow that baby to have a schedule and then work your life around that baby's schedule till the baby gets old enough to be able to begin to be a toddler, you're going to find that baby's going to thrive very well. The problem is, most of us, a baby comes into our lives, but they don't really fit because we already have a job and a career. And so what we're doing is we're taking 6 weeks off and then sticking them in a warehouse. And nobody's watching the child. And what you end up with are children that are upset and frustrated because there's no consistency. The second thing about discipline is not only that it needs to not be inconsistent, but it needs to not be impulsive. Before you ever discipline a child, stop. Don't start right into how you feel. Things like, I'll knock you into next week have no real meaning since you really can't. Or, I will ground you for life. Okay, really, seriously, they're going to drive you crazy in 3 days. Okay, because what happens is, you know what those mean. Those are them letting off steam, and as soon as they let off steam, they're going to forget all about it, and then you're going to go right back to the same rotten you that you've always been. Okay, that's it. That's how it's going to really work. The third one I use is don't use intimidation. If you don't listen, you just wait and see. Don't intimidate. Say what you mean. Typically, controlling parents impose consequences. Here's the thing. You're trying to educate a child, and to educate a child by running around throwing at them, your sister would never do this. Bad move. I would tell you this. Bad discipline also, I don't really believe in isolation as a discipline. I'm not saying I can't send you to your room for, an hour, but I think, 10 hours alone in a room where nobody talks to you is not discipline. You're just tired of looking at them. That's all. People learn by patterns. They learn by what they see. They learn by the communication that happens, not by the lack of it. It's interesting. The University of Southern California did a study years ago of parents that used isolation as discipline. Did you know who the majority were. Were they children who were only children or children of big families that used, you got to go and be alone? Which did that more? Exactly the opposite. It was only children. Can you imagine you're an only child, and so what they do is isolate you further? And yet, that tends to be the punishment method that a lot of people use. I think Christian discipline is constructive. I think the child's needs are at the center of it. I think it's calm. Let me give you a rule. Don't ever discipline a child in anger. Don't do it. When you're angry, don't discipline them yet. Stop. Get yourself worked out before you try to work them out. Okay? And by the way, we use the same thing with the daycare. Do not correct without calmness. Here's the question I want you to ask. Not, what would I like to do with this child? Ask this question. What does this child not understand? What do they need? What are they not getting? I think it's corrective. I think the emphasis has to be on how can we fix this behavior or this attitude. But I also think one of the greatest things, this is so important, one of the best things you can do for your kids is connect the dots between what they're doing and the consequences. If you do this, this is what happens. When you throw blocks, Johnny gets a block in the eye. A block in the eye is really not good for Johnny because God didn't design his eye to have blocks in it. Now, some of it, it's going to take, you know what you're trying to do? You are not trying to get a child that does the correct thing. Listen to me very carefully. Don't miss this one. You're not trying to get your child to do correct things. You're trying to get them to build a sensitive heart. When you have a child that is sensitive to what is right and what is wrong, it's not about whether they do it right. It's about whether or not it sticks in their heart and the sensitivity is there. So all I'm saying is what wasn't developed with Tamar, what wasn't developed with Amnon, what wasn't developed with Absalom, what wasn't developed in this home was a heart that saw the other people as people and connected the consequences of their actions. It never occurred to Amnon that he was ruining his sister. It never occurred to him. You know why? Because we have an unbelievable ability to objectivize one another and turn each other into pieces of meat instead of people. Ultimately, it's this, and then we'll close. If you don't build a home where people learn caring for one another, then you have not built a family. You built a house. And there's an awful lot of people that I know that do not understand the shaping and the orientation. One of the reasons I tell you never to criticize your spouse in front of your children, and I would tell you that very honestly, don't ever do it, is what you're teaching them is that putting somebody down is an okay way to deal with them. I don't like it when I hear the kind of sarcasm that cuts. You know what I'm talking about, right? I don't like the sarcasm that cuts. I don't like to hear it coming out of believers' mouths. But it's especially caustic when it's inside of a family. We all do a little bit of it. We have brothers, you know, we have sisters. But we need to be very, very careful to create in each other caring, sensitivity, because that's what actually at the end of the day shapes a child. Coming out of this story, when you come to the very end of it, just to close out today, Absalom ends up plotting. David ends up avoiding doing anything. Verse 22 says, Absalom did not speak to Amnon either good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Came about after 2 years, and now it goes on to the story of the revenge. Because David had 2 years to address it and didn't address it, one of his children will end up dead, the other child will end up shattered, a third child will end up running away to the grandparents, and there will now be a long, lengthy problem in the kingdom because David had 2 years to deal with something and didn't deal with it.